The Democrats are going full socialist as Bernie Sanders wins the Nevada caucuses, plus the Russia election scam hits another snag. There's a deep state hit list they're talking about now. Coronavirus fears are on the increase. Plus, we'll talk about the movie Parasite, that won Best Picture because I saw it. That and more coming up. Welcome, everybody, to the Buck Sexton Show. Man, I am fired up and ready to roll. I hope you are, too. Hope you had a great, relaxing, restful, productive weekend, maybe all of the above. We knew that Bernie Sanders looked like he was going to do, well, that he was going to win, not just do well, in Nevada. And it turns out that he really crushed the rest of the field in the Nevada caucuses. This is quite a moment, my friends, because the way the Democrats have set up the primary, if you get more than 15%, there are certain provisions that trigger with regard to delegates. There's a proportional delegate allotment along the way. And because of that, unless something really unexpected happens, unless Bloomberg just swoops in to save the Democratic Party from socialism, and who knows if Mini Mike is going to be able to pull that one off, it is looking like Bernie Sanders is going to be the next Democrat presidential nominee. Stunning stuff. Not entirely surprising, given the way the Democratic Party has been trending for the last decade or so. Some of you would probably say, Buck, for the last 100 years, but certainly for the last 10 years or so, the party has gone hard left. There's an increasingly desperate for relevance Democrat corporate media that also panders to the base, to the ideological hardcore of the Democratic Party, which is far left, which is increasingly dominated by socialists. And so that's what's brought us to our current moment in time here. That's what's actually brought us to this point where Bernie Sanders looks like he may very well be the Democrat nominee. Let's just take a step back for 1 second. We have been lectured, those of us who are Trump supporters, we have been lectured for the last 3+ years about how what's really needed in this country is a president that will restore norms, that will take us back to saner times, who respects the sacred institutions of our government. That's been a key talking point from the left, from the Democrats, all the above. And if you didn't go along with that, it was, why are you undermining our democracy? Why can't you see the threat that Trump poses to the norms, a much abused word, to the norms in this country? And those same Democrats now are putting forward a socialist who finds things to praise in Fidel Castro's Cuba and in the Soviet Union. So they lecture us about somebody who respects norms and institutions of government, and they put forward a radical whose greatest enemies are history and math. And there's this series now of late attacks from Democrat media showing that Bernie Sanders said some really wacko stuff back in the day. And I don't think that that should be in any way disqualified, because they're showing clips not from when he was 18 or even 25, clips from his 30s, his 40s, his 50s. And they're all consistent. Bernie has an affinity for commies. Bernie has an affinity for people who are willing to use pure authoritarianism to enact policies that he thinks create social justice. How far down that pathway would he be willing to go? Well, the truth, my friends, is something that you have to keep in mind. We won't know that until he's in power. Because we also did not know that about Castro. We did not know that about Stalin. We did not know that about Mao. We did not know that about Pol Pot. You go down the list of true authoritarians, and they always start out talking about how they're going to bring prosperity to people. They're going to have a government that takes care of the good people. Usually they create enemies inside and outside the state. Often leads to mass violence, extermination, genocide. But they do promise to do some good things. Oh, yes. Even the worst in history will tell you that they want to, and the Nazis had a war on cancer, for example. The Nazis believed very much in state health care for some people. They believe in extermination for others, as we know. But the state was unbound by individual rights. The state was unbound by a constitution like our own, rooted in natural law, rooted in a creator above the government apparatus, God above the state. Does Bernie Sanders believe that God is above the state, or the state is above God? Maybe somebody should ask him that question. He was asked some questions over the weekend by Anderson Cooper, who does 60 Minutes as well as CNN, because we really need to have Anderson Cooper asking all the questions. I don't know. It's amazing the brands that these individuals have created based on nothing that impresses me. But Bernie Sanders was asked specifically about praise that he had for Fidel Castro. And here is what Bernie Sanders said. Play clip 8. This was last night.
We're very opposed to the authoritarian nature of Cuba. But, it's unfair to simply say everything is bad. When Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program. Is that a bad thing? Even though Fidel Castro did it?
There's a lot of dissidents imprisoned in Cuba.
That's right. And we condemn that. Unlike Donald Trump, let's be clear. I do not think that Kim Jong-un is a good friend. I don't trade love letters with a murdering dictator. Vladimir Putin, not a great friend of mine.
We'll get into whether Putin is a friend of Bernie Sanders or not later, because there's this Russia scaremongering going on again, and now Bernie Sanders has been dragged into it. But notice how he talks about the way the president speaks of Kim Jong-un. The president has also threatened to annihilate Kim Jong-un. The president has kept in place the strongest sanctions regime against North Korea ever. He's tried to use the personality cult of Kim in order to stop the most likely place in the world for a nuclear war. So yes, he's taken a risk, and so far that risk has not worked out. But it's a small risk, because the rest of the policy is, North Korea, you do one thing wrong, and you will suffer more severe consequences than you ever have since the Korean War. That's what Donald Trump offers. But Bernie Sanders goes right to praising the literacy program. The literacy program? I'm just waiting for him to say that doctors in Cuba will treat you for free. Yes, if you can get in to see them. But you know what happens in the Cuban state? The same Cuban state that, for example, will talk about its literacy program and its healthcare program. This happens. This is a dispatch from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, 1967, the 7th of April. Just like you to know, what Bernie Sanders takes his time to praise still things that have happened in Cuba on a government level, the government policies of Cuba. Here's what happens in Cuba as well. 166 Cubans, civilians and members of the military, were executed and submitted to medical procedures of blood extraction of an average of 7 pints per person. This blood is sold to communist Vietnam at a rate of $50 per pint, with the dual purpose of obtaining hard currency and contributing to the Viet Cong communist aggression. A pint of blood is equivalent to half a liter. Extracting this amount of blood from a person sentenced to death produces cerebral anemia and a state of unconsciousness and paralysis. Once the blood is extracted, the person is taken by 2 militiamen on a stretcher to the location where the execution takes place. Bernie Sanders doesn't mind that Cuba is a country where if you have the wrong politics, if you believe in individual rights and property and God and the church and justice, if you believe in those things, they may engage in state-sanctioned, not just mass execution, but state-sanctioned blood harvesting and sell it to other commies. I'll never forget being told by a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, who was at the Bay of Pigs, who fought on our side and who was captured by the bad guys, about how after they fought and fought until they ran out of ammunition and then had to surrender because JFK did not have the character or the gall to do what was necessary. After they surrendered, they were herded into shipping containers, including my dear friend. And he heard them, he's a fluent Spanish speaker, he heard them say, as they were sealing up that shipping container, One junior officer said to a more senior officer, "But sir, many of them will slowly cook and suffocate to death in there. There's no ventilation. This is in Cuba. It's a shipping container. They stuffed he said it felt like over 100 people into one of them." And the guy said, "Good. The slower the better." And they shut the door. And about half the people in the shipping container died. That's Cuba. Now, Bernie Sanders takes the time to tell you that Cuba does some good stuff. I want to know what's the cost that he's willing to pay to do, quote, some good stuff. What's he willing to do in this country? Who is he willing to bankrupt? Who's he willing to throw in prison? Who's he willing to dispossess? This is a man of mediocre intelligence at best, who has been a politician in a state that, quite honestly, in terms of population and political importance, could be a medium-sized suburb of a major city, one suburb. And we're supposed to listen to him about how to dramatically reorganize the U.S. economy? My friends, we are not at DEFCON 1 or 2 here in American politics, but this is starting to approach socialism DEFCON 3. This is not good. We've got a real problem here. Now, I have been saying to you that I want America to have this choice. But I also believe, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, it is absolutely essential that we do everything we can to make sure that the information about socialism and what it really is and what Bernie Sanders really stands for is out there. Because the media, you're going to see this now, because they're absolutely disgusting, self-important, dishonest hacks. MSNBC, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, go down the list. Go down the list. They don't protect your freedoms. They don't protect your dignity. They protect themselves, their power, their privileges, their money. That's all they care about. They're going to do everything that they can. Everything that they can. Once it's clear Sanders is the nominee, to pretend that he's just some cuddly Ben & Jerry's eating guy from Vermont who wants to bring about, Denmark in America, where everyone's healthy and rides around on bicycles and has everything that they need. It's a lie. He's lying to you. There are fundamental lies at the heart of Bernie Sanders' appeal, and there's a rejection of history and an understanding of the atrocities of socialist regimes. Why do socialist regimes turn into authoritarian states? Why? There are reasons for this. There are root causes to this. It's not an accident. Bernie Sanders tries to wave his hand and yell and talk about rich people, and it's all a deflection. He is selling a fundamentally rotten political system that debases human beings, that empowers the state at the expense of the individual and the expense of the individual's natural rights. And he's doing so with a smile and the assistance of leftists who are either radicals or ignoramuses, and a media apparatus that just wants anything other than Trump. So we are in a dangerous time now, my friends. We are entering a period of American politics that we have not seen before in at least 50 years. In some ways, perhaps even worse than what was going on in the 60s. We'll break down some more about Bernie Sanders because we have to look at the specifics here.
I think what I learned, one of the things that I think I learned on my trip, as a socialist, the word socialism does not frighten me, and I think it's probably fair to say that the Nicaraguan government is primarily a socialist government.
Doesn't frighten him. Friend of the Sandinistas. Go back and read a bit about how the Sandinistas conducted their business, how Castro conducted his business. Where is the great socialist revolution that did not end in blood and misery and despair? Oh, he'll point to Europe. He'll point to societies. He'll point to industrialized societies in Europe and say, but look at what they do. And I'll say, right, they have laws that protect the rights of property in the individual. They have, in many ways, depends on which country we're talking about. If you're looking at Denmark, if you're looking at Sweden, they have more pro-business policies in place than even the United States does when it comes to regulation, when it comes to free market capitalism. But also they have a promise that has been made to the people of those countries with an honest price tag attached to it. This is the clear difference. In Sweden, people have no choice. If you want to be a Swede, you're going to pay roughly 60% of whatever you earn to the government. Now, this is massively inefficient, and it creates effectively a state of comfortable mediocrity for most Swedes, let's be honest. But at least there's truth in how they try to pay for this. And by the way, over the long term, they can't even sustain what they have. I've talked to Swedes about this, and they'll tell you that between some of the immigration issues that they've been going through, the Swedish state, it's been deregulating in recent years, not becoming more regulatory in its approach to business and taxation. Keep in mind that these massive welfare states that have been created, the people that set them in place are now the beneficiaries of it, and the price tag is being heaped upon the young. It's true in this country. It's true in Europe as well. You also have to ask Bernie Sanders, well, do we want to be Sweden? I thought we were America. So just pointing to what they do over there all the time and saying, look at that. We'll be fine here because we'll do it that way too. Are we really going to do it that way? I've been telling you, Bernie Sanders offers you Venezuela because it's social justice-based socialism. It takes into account the intersectional beliefs of the left that there are oppressed classes and there are oppressors. And even if your class was just historically an oppressor, that has to be made right now at your expense. There will be people in charge. There'll be people empowered in the government apparatus to decide who shall be elevated and who shall be suppressed. It's going to be entirely in their hands. By the way, the earliest socialists in the Soviet Union called themselves Social Democrats. Do not forget that. That was their promise. And Tsar Nicholas II was an inept buffoon. And the Russian state was this enormous, corrupt behemoth. And there were efforts early on to create a constitutional monarchy. It was really a constitutional autocracy. It didn't work out that well. But there was real reason for people to be upset. The initial push was for Social Democrats to come to power, who were going to do all of the things that socialists promise throughout history and have for the last 100 or so years. They're going to make everything better for you. Bernie Sanders has built a political coalition and is building a presidential candidacy that has to be not just taken seriously, but now has to be confronted based upon lies. His promise that you will pay less for your health care, for example, than you do right now when the government is in charge of your health care, and it will be anywhere near as good what you're used to, that's a lie. And everybody who knows anything knows it's a lie.
It's not run by the government. Medicare allows you to go to any doctor you want. For better or worse, this is not socialized medicine. This is keeping the same system intact, but getting rid of the private insurance companies, giving people another card, which allows them complete freedom.
Complete freedom, he's promising you. What you're going to get is unfreedom in your health care. Because the government is not going to be able to afford the expansion of a system that is already not affordable. Not only is the system going to be expanded with Medicare for All in terms of how many people are in it, remember, there are some basic things in life. Somebody should really sit down with Bernie Sanders, Ron Swanson style, and explain capitalism. Hey, here I am. I spent a couple of hours gathering a bunch of apples. I have X amount of apples. Would you like to give me a currency, a medium of exchange, something to make my make my time worthwhile? Would you like to do that? Would you like to engage in this basic transaction? Oh, you would? Okay, cool. Oh, no, you want 100 apples? I only have 50. And you have to go to the next town in order to get a few apples from somebody else? Well, that's why the price is what it is, because he's going to charge you X, I'm going to charge you Y, but I'm convenient for you. I'm right here. These very basic concepts. I know it sounds like this is capitalism for a third grader, but that's what Bernie Sanders pretends does not exist. The healthcare system in this country is comprised of, I'm talking about at the delivery level, is comprised of people who have spent their time learning skills, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, etc., learning how to do something, and then being compensated for those skills in the market. Now, we have a hyper-regulated healthcare market, and we have all these insurance companies that are constantly trying to find ways to move around what should be moving around risk, but it's really just redistributing money to different pools based on politics. based on what the political winds are determining at any point in time. The biggest of all, by the way, is the transfer of wealth from younger people to old people, as we see through Medicare. That's the single biggest wealth transfer that's going on. People don't like to hear that. It's reality. It's the truth. Medicare beneficiaries, on average, that means a lot of them take out more, twice what they pay into Medicare over the course of their life. Well, that's a great system, isn't it? That sounds like a Ponzi scheme, doesn't it? How can that continue on? Well, Bernie Sanders pretends that the healthcare system is not people who could do other things. Doctors could decide, hey, I'm going to be, I'm going to be a school teacher, or I'm going to open a dry cleaning business, or whatever. They could do other things, but doctors want to do this and also want to be compensated. Same with nurses and the rest of the people in the healthcare system. Well, guess what? If they're not paid enough for their time, for the patients that they see, they can't pay their rent. They can't pay their medical school outstanding debts. They can't keep the office open. They can't pay for the usually very gruff and rude ladies, at least in New York City, who are at the front desk of pretty much every medical practice in the city, who somehow are just always in a bad mood. I'm just saying, I don't know what it is here in New York, but that's what you deal with. Sometimes it's dudes, usually it's ladies, but either or. Not very nice usually at the front desk of a medical office. It's probably because they deal with annoyed people who can't get in to see the doctor, who don't understand the billing practices of the insurance company, and who are constantly frustrated and who are doing way too much paperwork. But that's the system as we have right now. So what Bernie Sanders is telling you is, oh, I'm going to give you this government card that's going to say, no, you just show up and you give this to that grumpy front desk lady or man, and the doctor will take care of everything for you. Everything will be taken care of. And you say, oh, wow, that sounds like a really great system, doesn't it? And now everyone's going to want to go to similar doctors usually, right? People are going to want to go see the best doctors they can. What happens when all of a sudden people are overusing these systems? And by that, I mean, what happens when there are too many people that are trying to access doctors in certain areas and aren't making cost-based decisions because the cost doesn't matter anymore? Now, some people argue this and they say no one goes to see a doctor unless they need to. Really? I've had the flu before, and I've thought, do I want to go to the doctor and spend $150 to be told I've got the flu? No. But maybe personal anecdotes aren't the most precise. I'll admit that. The libs won't admit that. But so they're going to tell you go to the doctor, you're going to give them a card. Okay. The government currently doesn't pay enough under Medicare for most doctors to want to take Medicare. They take Medicare. Hospitals, for example, take Medicare, and then they gouge everybody in the private system in order to make up for the low cost of the services provided, the low reimbursement rates for Medicare. So you go in to see the doctor, you give them your Medicare card, and the government says, okay, we'll give that doctor $100, but the doctor says, look, my cost for the time, for being here, for the market cost of this visit or these procedures that I'm going to do is double that. Or, let's say it's 50% more. So now we're going to say, okay, well, the government's going to come in and give everybody the right to go in and demand, because the government says so with a card, hey, you're going to give me services and it's going to be 50% less than what you need to actually cover the market cost of this. How is that going to work? They're going to lose money but make it up on volume? I mean, that's really what Bernie Sanders is promising you. And then once you add strains to the system of he's going to want to give health care to illegal aliens, they're going to get the special government card. Everyone's going to get this Medicare for all card. This will be catastrophically expensive. And by the way, the biggest expenses in someone's life for their health care tend to be at end of life. Now, does everybody at end of life, this is what Michael Bloomberg brought up, and it sounded really mean. It reminds people of the Sarah Palin death panels, right? She talked about that. Okay, well, here's the reality of pretending there won't be government death panels, which is what we've been told by libs who push government health care on us. So as Bloomberg brought up, and of course he's Bloomberg, it was like, I don't care about poor people, and fine. But, he says it was a 95-year-old guy has prostate cancer, and he wants, let's say, one of these. There are treatments out there that cost $500,000 to up to $2 million that are specifically genetically engineered for an individual to try to beat cancer. Does every 95-year-old who has stage 4 cancer get to have the government pay for that procedure? What do you think the cost of that's going to be? And by the way, why not do it? Meaning, if you're that person, and maybe you've only got a few years left, or maybe you've only got a few months left if you don't do the procedure, the government's going to pay for it. Yeah, sure, do that. you start to get to this point where you say, well, how do you keep costs? What will keep costs down in a system that's already on track to bankrupt us? This is math. This is reality. Bernie Sanders completely negates all of this. He says you're going to pay more in taxes, but you're going to save money. This is the promise that he keeps making. But he doesn't know how much it's even going to cost. So how could he actually know whether or not he'll be able to pay for it? The answer is, of course, he doesn't. Play clip 11, producer Mark. This is Bernie Sanders telling you just that.
How much will that cost?
Obviously, those are expensive propositions, but we have done our best on issue after issue in paying for them.
Do you know how much, though? I mean, do you have a price tag for all of this?
We do. I mean, the price tag is, it will be substantially less than letting the current system go. I think it's about $30 trillion.
That's just for Medicare for all.
Just Medicare for all. Yes.
Do you have a price tag for all of these things?
No, I don't. We try to. No, you mentioned making public colleges and universities tuition free and canceling all student debt. That's correct. That's what I want to do. We pay for that through a modest tax on Wall Street speculation.
But you say you don't know what the total price is, but you know how it's going to be paid for. How do you know it's going to be paid for if you don't know how much the price is?
Well, I can't rattle off to you every nickel and every dime, but we have accounted for it. You talked about Medicare for all. We have options out there that will pay for it.
Yeah, just, options, he says, that will pay for it. I mean, the federal budget is over $3 trillion a year as it is, approaching $4 trillion. The most honest assessments of what Bernie Sanders' proposals will cost range around 80 to 90 trillion dollars of additional spending over the next 10 years. You will be working for the government. Whatever you do, whatever profession you are in, your paychecks will be going to the government and only the government for 2/3 of the year. That will become your reality. Now, how do you get ahead? How do you build wealth? How do you choose your own future, your own destiny when the government's taking 60% of every dollar you make? And to make this math even begin to work, it'll have to be not 60% of the millionaires and the billionaires. It'll be 60% of people making $60,000 a year, making $40,000 a year. That's the only way the math can work, because there are a lot more of those people than there are people that are making $1 billion a year. There aren't that many billionaires, and they don't have that much money. Despite what Bernie Sanders says, when you're talking about national policy for 320 million people, 330 million people, I think now is a better estimate of it. What Bernie Sanders is proposing, if he could get it through, and keep in mind he is planning to do much of this via executive order. What if Bernie Sanders decides that he's just going to veto everything until we go along? What if he's willing to shut the government down in order to get the government to be twice the size? You don't know. This guy's nuts. Nobody really understands what he's willing to do. But we do understand that he knows nothing about how the healthcare system works. He knows nothing about this. This couldn't even be done in his home state of Vermont, which, if you were trying to create a little socialist commune within America, Vermont would be a pretty good start. Couldn't even get this done the way that he wanted to there. Why? Too expensive. California can't do this. Why? Too expensive. Where does the money come from? It can't just be everybody gets all the healthcare spending they want all the time and someone else pays for it, because there's not that someone else. I mean, this is a lesson that you would think we would have learned over the last 100 years of this. But no, we do not. We do not learn it. And those who will point to what's going on in other countries, we have to do a direct line comparison of, okay, what are health outcomes they're really like? How large is the private healthcare system in those countries, the separate private healthcare system? It doesn't really deal with what they're saying right now. Bernie Sanders supporters are promising, which is we're all going to be on the same system. That's not true. The private health system will become very large unless they outlaw that. Mandate you have to be in this government system, and then you are in a Cuba situation. I mean, then the whole thing does collapse. But the rich, Bernie Sanders with his 3 houses, they're not going to, when things get really tough, they're not going to wait 6 months to see a specialist, which is what you have to do in Canada. They're not going to be told, sorry, no cancer drugs for you, even though you're, in your early 60s, because, we're just going to try the basic chemo. If it doesn't work, you're on your own, hospice care. which is what they do in the UK, right? I mean, you look at this and we see how this experiment plays out. And I don't want that here. If people understood what the real costs were, I think that they would flee Sanders in droves. There are some Democrats who recognize how insane this whole thing is. That's somewhat reassuring, but also terrifying that they let it get to this point.
Is America great?
In many ways, we are. In some ways, very significant ways, we're not. We're not great when half of our people today are living paycheck to paycheck. When 500,000 people tonight are going to be sleeping out on the streets, including 30,000 veterans.
Yeah, we're not so great. That's who the libs want to elevate as the next president of the United States. It does have some connection to Obamaism, which was the elevation of the liberal mentality and sense of self-importance over America. Like if you're a lib who wants to transform America, you're better than the rest of America. It was a campaign. It's really a political ideology built on inherent virtue signaling. Right? When you sign on for Sandersism or Obamaism, you're saying, yeah, there's some nice stuff about America, but we know how to make this place really awesome because it's not so awesome. Now, this is where people say, but what about Trump and make America great again? No, what Trump was saying, what Trump's rise was all about was we were pushing away the things that had made this country great because it is so great. It's an opposition to the transformationalists, if you will, of Sanders and Obama and others. Trump is saying, no. We don't have to think of ourselves as not such a great country that has to go around the world bowing, apologizing. We're so sorry about this. We're so sorry about that. Let's hear from countries that shouldn't even really have a seat at the table to discuss major issues with us. But, I mean, if Libya is going to be on the Human Rights Council, got to sit down and have a chat with them. It's a different approach that Trump has from these other politicians. And it's a different America as a result of it right now. It certainly feels different. Although there's this make-believe world that libs inherit, that things are going so badly in this country. What exactly is going so badly? The terrible economy, the high unemployment, the terrorist attacks that seem like we just can't stop, that keep happening and happening and happening. The mass casualties, or the casualties that are amassed in wars abroad that are currently not happening. We take some casualties here and there, but hopefully they'll be down to zero in Trump's second term. It's a tiny fraction of what the casualties were, for example, in Afghanistan under Obama. What is the terrible thing that we're all supposed to be so worried about now when it comes to this president? They never have an answer. This is delusional. They don't really, he's a white nationalist. I mean, they just throw out these personal smears. He's not a white nationalist, and to say so is reckless and stupid. And no one who knows the president thinks he's a white nationalist, and none of his policies can be accurately, in good faith, described as white nationalist policies. It's all lies. The great irony of all here is that they're always accusing Trump of being the big liar. Also, what makes us think that Bernie Sanders would even be good at any of this? I mean, maybe that's the saving grace if he were to become the next president of the United States, is that he's so inept. He's not a talented administrator. He's not a talented executive. I mean, the biggest thing he's ever run is the town of Burlington, which, while is kind of a fun place to hang out for a day, I will tell you, I think it has like less than 100,000 residents. It's not a very big place. So he's a small town. Mayor Pete, small town mayor. Bernie Sanders, small town mayor. It's as though some like the college socialists somewhere who live in some off-campus house and have created a commune. They're now saying, hey, look what we did. Let's run the country this way now. It's not going to work. It's going to be a disaster. And you can't help but feel that there is an underlying animus that Sanders has toward our system, and there's a sympathy that he has for systems that have been catastrophic. I mean, the Soviet Union condemned hundreds of millions of people to misery, poverty, and servitude to the state. And Sanders seems to think, but there was a lot of good stuff too. No, that's a bizarre mentality. That is his mentality. He seems to think that they were close. If only they had done a few things differently, they would have the workers' paradise, the socialist utopia that was promised. It's false. It's false. Sanders is offering America a choice, and the entire choice is based on a lie. And if we make the wrong decision here, it's going to be very bad for this country with ramifications that go far beyond just one presidency.